Welcome. I am here with the Westchester Living Team, Compass Westchester's #1 team in the county, and they are joined by real estate attorney Dana Montone and mortgage broker Fred from Wells Fargo to discuss the current real estate market and the different characteristics that make each neighborhood unique, and how the Westchester Living Team is able to successfully guide their clients into their perfect homes. So we're going to dive into the conversation, but first I'd like for each of our panelists to introduce themselves, because who better to talk about someone than yourself? So let's begin with the Westchester Living Team. We'll begin with Sari Shaw to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Jen and Dana and Fred.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to tune in with us. We hope that you find this informational, educational, and we get to answer any questions you may have. My name is Sari Shaw, and I live in northern Westchester. I live in Chappaqua. For those who don't know it, Chappaqua is best known for the Clintons. They in fact live here, and we had some other politicians on the other side of town, but more than just that, Chappaqua is really known for its sense of community, its location in terms of direct access to the city and school system. So initially, I am from Long Island and decided that we were not going to go back there very quickly. It was not much of a decision. And we moved to Westchester after we lived in the city for about 12 to 13 years. I cover, for the most part, northern Westchester, so Chappaqua, Armonk, Pleasantville, Briarcliff, Katona, Bedford, that type of area up, while Jen, and we'll get to her, covers the south. And we've, over the years, assembled a team that has individual agents in different markets so we can help serve needs of people that are buying all over the county. So I look forward to connecting with some of you after this webinar. Jen?
Hi, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Guy for moderating, and Fred and Dana for being on the panel. I'm Jennifer Ross, a lifelong Westchester resident. I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, and after college and graduate school and meeting my husband in the city, relocated back up to Westchester and spent about 14 years raising my family in Larchmont. Recently moved up to the Katona School District, work out of the Larchmont office. And as Sari mentioned, my area of expertise is Southern Westchester, primarily focusing on Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye, Scarsdale, Pelham, New Rochelle, and the surrounding communities. We co-founded the Westchester Living Team at Compass to help people, regardless of where they go in Westchester, have that hyper-local expertise. And, we really do pride ourselves on the team relationship, and then extending the team relationship to wonderful partners like Fred and Dana, so that we can really help people from start to finish when you're thinking about making a move to closing.
Beautiful. Now let's hear from Fred.
My name is Fred Grise. I work for the private mortgage bank at Wells Fargo. Been practicing real estate since I was 18 years old, from the tri-state area, whether it's Connecticut, New York, or New Jersey. In terms of territories, I actually can cover the whole country. So whether it's Alaska or Hawaii, I can even help you with your vacation home or investment property. But in respect to today's conversation, we're going to focus right here on New York, whether it's in Long Island or Westchester or New York City. I want to thank you everybody for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I want to thank Sky and Sari and Jennifer and Dana for doing this presentation with me. I'm going to walk you through the pre-qualification process, kind of help you understand the ins and outs of getting pre-qualified for a mortgage, and give you a couple hints on some strategies that people are using today to get their properties, win the bids in this competitive market. So I look forward to speaking with all of you.
Thank you. And Dana.
Hi, my name is Dana Montone, and I'm a sole practitioner here in Westchester County. I have an office in White Plains, New York, and I'm a resident of Rybrook, New York in Westchester. I want to thank Sari and Jennifer for inviting me to the panel. I work with them often. My sole focus of my practice is residential real estate in Westchester. I help a lot of first-time home buyers in the purchases of their homes. I also help sellers And I've worked with Fred as well on the mortgage side. And usually the broker, the attorney, and the mortgage broker, we all do a really good job of working with our clients in their purchases and of their homes. And I'm happy to discuss more today about the contract process and the mortgage process.
Great. So now that we know all of our panelists and their expertise, we'll dive into conversation. And again, I want to reiterate that with our panel here, feel free to jump into the conversation, because I find that these webinars are more engaging when we're all together having a conversation. So feel free. You guys are the experts. I'm here to just guide us through. So let's talk about the real estate market in general. Like, it was super hot during the pandemic. Is it super hot? What are you seeing, Jen and Sari, out there on the streets?
Well, I would say that it is still super hot. However, like a normal year, we are feeling some seasonality with the real estate market. Typically, we do follow a school calendar so that, many families want to get in for the school year, and September is a little bit of a lull. That's not to say there aren't new properties coming on, but you may not have a situation where there are 20 bids on a house. That's amazing, but you'll have some competitive bidding. So, inventory levels are really low right now in Larchmont, Mamaroneck. There's something like 40 homes on the market. Scarsdale has something like 50 homes on the market. And typically we'd see many, many more in the spring market. So right now is a good time to sort of dive in, because it doesn't feel as competitive, at least down south. Sari, how's it in your market?
I happen to have quite a bit of homes on the market and more that are coming. And I'm definitely seeing a little bit of a slowdown. It's not to say that there aren't showings. There's certainly showings and offers being generated. But like Jen said, there definitely is a seasonality. What's different this year, though, and was different in 2020, which we didn't see in 19. So I think as we make comparisons, it's really important we don't compare to 2020, because 2020 and 2021 kind of blend into each other. I would certainly say prices in 2020 were higher than 2020. 2021 prices are higher than 2020, but the demand has pretty much stayed. When we looked at like April, May, June of this year, I was baffled by the amount of bids that each property was getting. We're talking in the teens, each bid for different homes. And we're seeing now that there's like two or three or four, depending on what that property is. But what's different than on 19 is that you're not really seeing, and I'm going to put this in quotes, you're not going to really see leftover inventory, because there's nothing left over. So sometimes people would look to that September, October market for a deal, i.e. it didn't sell in the spring. Maybe I can get a deal in February. I can get a deal in, perhaps September, October, going into November. It's just not the case so much anymore, because all the inventory is new. So it's not like it's been sitting out there. There's been some reductions or things like that. It's just brand new stuff. And we're seeing that one or two homes a week are still coming on the market, and they are being gobbled up. So it's still very much, and it's important to understand this, and Fred can speak more about the interest rates and all the rest of it. The combination of those interest rates, the demand to possibly leave urban areas, plus a deficiency in inventory, is a trifecta of demand, right? And that demand is really, really, really helping sellers. It just is. Because if you're going to have multiple demand, there's not 5 or 6 different homes for people to choose from. Each one of those opportunities becomes a little bit more important for a buyer to capitalize on. So, as interest rates for the most part are still under 3, depending on what you qualify for, we're seeing an unbelievable demand, because people's buying power has really, really augmented to much more than they possibly thought it would be 2 years ago. If that answers anything.
Yeah, no, let's dive into interest rates, but I want to ask another question. Where are you, Jen and Sari, seeing most of your buyers coming from?
Are mostly coming from the city, Upper East Side, Upper West, Brooklyn, Long Island City. And then you do have also some fluctuation in terms of where people are going in Westchester.
Yeah.
Just as, people's needs in the city changed vis-a-vis the pandemic, people's needs in Westchester have also changed. So some people are moving further out, or considering Connecticut, or just mixing it up because they don't consider themselves as day-to-day commuters. Whether or not that'll actually be the case, we'll see. But, they, can work from home a couple of days a week or full time, and it just opens a lot of communities.
If you look at the communities that are showing like really strong double-digit growth, Again, they could be looking at 2020, if you extrapolated and put these 2 years together and went against 19 markets like Chappaqua, Armonk, certainly Katona, Bedford, Pound Ridge, all of these markets that are further north, right? So when I say further north, I mean 50 minutes plus on the train, or, we say north of 287, but specifically, I'm looking at that type of commute, are up exponentially. I mean, I'm talking 50, 60, 70% increases, and that's on rate and volume. And it has exactly to do with people's lives changing. A lot of business that I'm seeing is not just city. I would say more from Brooklyn, first of all, than if I were to take the city and Brooklyn apart, I would say Brooklyn has actually picked up quite a bit, or in 2020, it was more city. I'd also say that for Northern Westchester, we're seeing a lot of migration from south to north, because people are not as concerned about the 30, 40-minute commute, because they could do the extra 10, 13, 15 minutes because they just might not be in the city every day, or they're planning that they're not going to be in the city every day. So they're just getting a little bit more for a little bit less.
And then also some of the communities in Southern Westchester that had the intrigue, they still do. And I would say that, certain buyers are just not going to go north, and others, want the lifestyle. They want more lands and all of that. I think what's interesting across the landscape is pre-pandemic, Southern Westchester and certain communities in particular had just this uptick constantly of demand. And now it's sort of everywhere. So when people are like, well, where are the pockets of less interest? You really have to search, because it's pretty much across the board right now. Again, things are priced appropriately and renovated and, move-in ready and all of that, but it really could be any community.
But like from a macro scale, I think if I had to choose a market that probably had the craziest demand in terms of interest in every property and percent over that I've ever seen, would probably have been Larchmont. I've never seen consistently anywhere from what, Jen, 16 to like 25% over asking price, something like that.
Right.
Wow.
Has been intense.
I want to bring now Fred into the conversation when it comes to these interest rates, like we were speaking about. At what point should someone reach out to get a mortgage, thinking if it's so competitive working with the Westchester Living Team, right? You want to put a bid on a house. When does the mortgage part of the conversation come into play?
Guy, thank you. So Jen, sorry, Dana, they're busy. Rates are low. People are buying houses. It's a very, very serious market right now. People are moving. It's competitive. You got to be prepared. You got to be ready. If you're thinking about buying a house, you need to understand what your purchasing power is before you go out and look at the house, or else you're just wasting time. And there is no real time to be wasted right now. Typically, if you see something that you like, you're going to know it, and you're going to know it pretty fast, and you need to be able to act on it immediately. You need to get pre-qualified up front. You need to provide your documents up front, whether it's a W-2 or a pay stub or 100 K-1s. I mean, there's a million scenarios out there, but you got to vet yourself, and you have to understand what your purchasing power is. Every $100,000 that you finance in a mortgage, depending on the rate and depending on the product, though, if it's an amortizing loan, typically costs you $410 a month, roughly. You need to understand what you can afford. You need to understand what you want to pay. It's not even necessarily what me as a banker is going to tell you can afford. You have to be comfortable with that payment, and you have to understand that walking in there. You have to understand the taxes. You have to understand the insurance. You have to understand all the other costs that come with owning the house. And that's what I'm here to help you with. You need to talk to someone like myself or another person, at Wells Fargo or one of these other institutions. But you need to have them pull your credit. You need to have them collect your documentation. And you need to have them run some pricing scenarios for you so you can fully comprehend, what you're getting yourself into. Because when you go out in the market and you see that house that Jen or Sari is going to show you, I mean, if that's the house that you want, you've got to act quick. There's going to be multiple offers on any property that you like, because if you like it, trust me, there's a bunch of other people out there that are ready to go and ready to purchase it, and they want it also. So, I mean, you just have to be ready to act is really how it is, in this market. You've got to be serious. Those listings that are hot to trot, that are ready to go, and Jen and Sari can attest to this, I mean, if it's a really good listing and it comes on the market, they go quick, same day, in my opinion, from what I've seen recently. I mean, sure, it slowed down recently as we went through the summer, and I get it. It is seasonal and we do follow the school calendar. But, right now, as we speak, there's some serious buyers out there. There's that small little window before we get into the holiday season. So you just really, really, really have to be prepared. If you are thinking of buying something next month, you should already be vetted, in what your financing is going to look like. If you're thinking of buying something next spring, you should already be speaking to someone like myself, so you understand exactly what that means in terms of what you can or cannot do in reality, whatever your purchasing power is.
Right. And oftentimes people ask Jen and I, they'll say we're spending, and this is really important to differentiate of what Jen and I can figure out in our heads and what we can't. Somebody will say, I'm spending, $8,000 and rent in the city. I want to stay around $8,000 a month. It's very difficult for Jen and I to extrapolate the taxes plus the interest rate in your purchase price. It's almost impossible. That's where someone like Fred would come into play, where he could kind of tell you at $8,000 a month, your purchase price is 1.4 and you could afford X in taxes, and how that works if you put your taxes into your monthly mortgage payments. It's just not something Jen and I are equipped to figure out. We could try to guess, but it would never be anything of real substance. So it's important to kind of understand how that number is derived and what your monthly, because rent to mortgage and taxes it's not apples to apples. And it's just not something we can figure out.
Especially if you're looking in different communities, because the tax rates can vary so differently throughout Westchester. So it's hard. So, having that big financial picture and being vetted is helpful.
Yeah, these are good points that you bring up. And I want to say to our live audience, if you have questions, please type them in. And towards the end of this conversation, I'm happy to pose some questions to our panelists here for those of us that are confused or think that this is a lot of information, because for a lot of, especially first-time home buyers, it's overwhelming, especially when there's competition out there. So now with Dana, I want to bring you into the conversation. When should someone seek a real estate attorney? Is that towards the end of the process, or should they connect with you in the beginning of the process?
So typically the attorneys get involved in the process once a purchaser has an accepted offer, but even sometimes before that. And I would recommend prior to that as well. So that way, when the purchaser makes their offer, they have their attorney lined up. So that way, when the offer is in, the seller's attorney can also see who the listing agent can also see who the attorney is. Sometimes that helps if it's a local attorney. Everything else being equal, the listing agent is happy to see somebody they know on an attorney that they know. So that way they know that this person can get the deal, done. So usually the agent, a lot of my business is from either past referrals, or the agents such as Jen and Sari will let their clients know you need an attorney. And then when they make their offer, I get that call. So once there is an accepted offer, the next step in the process is that the purchaser has to do an inspection of the property. So in New York, and a purchaser takes the house in as is condition. So once the contract is signed, they're taking that house in as is condition. So having the inspection before contract signing is imperative. So then the agents put out a one-page memorandum of understanding that sets forth the material terms between the buyer and the seller. And that's when the attorneys are put on that memorandum of understanding. And that's when we truly get involved in the process. And the seller's attorney would draft the contract of sale. They would send it to the purchaser's attorney, and then we'll work on the contract. And once the contract is in agreement, then the house is off the market and they can accept other offers. So that process can be when there's a hot house and there are a lot of offers. You want that process to be quick, so that way nothing is binding until both parties have signed that contract. So the purchaser wants an attorney who can work quickly and thoroughly to get them so that they don't, lose a house to another buyer.
So it sounds like the very first step is seeing someone like Fred to get an idea of your financial standing. And you have to have that paperwork when you go and look for a house, because you got to be ready to strike and you got to know what you can do. Is that?
Yeah, and in certain cases, and I would say over 50% of the cases, it was 100% when COVID was in full effect, but at least 50% now of agents or agencies or agents through their agencies either way require pre-approvals for appointments because they don't want Sunday shopping. There's no reason for you to come into a home in their minds to look at a house and put the sellers out and, you know, all the rest of it if they don't know that you can afford it. So the pre-approval process is integral in buying a home. It's actually quite integral to even looking.
So knowing that there's limited inventory, how would you advise someone, Jen and Sari, to even get to know the neighborhoods? Should people drive around? Like, how should people even know where they want to move, knowing there's limited inventory? If they definitely want a house, what should they do?
Well, I think that we also pride ourselves on not just selling homes, but also selling lifestyles and communities. So in this type of year, it is an important time to get out there and go on a tour with Sari, with one of the agents on our team, with me, to see the various communities. You know, it's like, you know, when you're going to look at colleges, you kind of get that vibe going and you show up at a campus and you say, this is it. Part of that is going out to, you know, lunch in a community, going to the playground, looking around. But another way is to go on these tours where we can take you around, show you where people get their coffee, where people go to the farmer's market, where people go shopping, talk to you about what our daily lives are like in the communities to help you get that sense. Because you're right, it's very fast paced. And once you're at the point where you want to execute and actually buy a home, that's not really the time to say, oh, do I want to live in this community? Which community should I be in? That's the time to get serious and aggressive and fast on the home purchase. So we do this all the time.
And if you think of seasonality, the fall in markets like Westchester, Westchester County is really known for being green, right? So we're not strip malls, we're not big buildings outside of White Plains, perhaps, and maybe a couple others, but like we're mostly residential. You come out here for fresh air and trees. So what happens to the trees in the fall? They turn all certain different colors, right? So it's just a beautiful time to tack on to a fall festival or something like that. And Jen and I can follow up with anybody on this call in terms of setting up tours, but there's always something going on everywhere. I mean, I can list at least 10 different events that are happening in Westchester without looking anything up. And it really gives you an idea because it gets those communities out. So it's not just like you're having lunch and maybe if there's soccer or baseball going on or both at that particular time, it's not that busy. So maybe you don't see as many people, but when you overlap with something going on, it really brings out the entire community. And it really shows you and answers certain questions that ethically Jen and I can't. You know, and you can kind of see and touch and feel these communities to see if it makes the right sense for you. We include school tours. We show you, you know, who goes where, zoning for this. And we talk about the taxes as we go through the towns because the taxes are super sensitive. They're all different per town. Every municipality basically has a different percentage and how it's calculated and all those sorts of things. And we always slow down that process while we're doing these tours to kind of give you an idea of what you get for what. And what the taxes go for and what part goes to school versus what part goes to town. And if there's a village and how that kind of factors into your overall picture of a town.
Are you doing open houses at this time?
Yes. Often every weekend. I think I've been running about 3 a weekend. So this weekend we'll have 3 also. Open houses are typically Sundays. And it's easy to go and bounce from one to the other to kind of take a look at the house, but that shows you the house. It doesn't show you the town. So
a lot of people are coming out to those open houses currently, I assume.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of.
Yeah, they've been packed. I'm not going to lie. They've been packed. But understand a lot of people, like Jen and I were saying with these tours, are looking at these communities kind of one by one on their own. So they don't necessarily know the best way to kind of see the whole town at once. So they're looking at a town here. I saw this one had a good school system, or this one, like I have a friend who moved here 2 years ago or a year ago who really likes it. And then they'll go and look at those homes. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're purchasing right now, but it's an easy non-pressure type situation where you could go in and look at a home and kind of see what the price point is and those sorts of things.
So today is Tuesday. If there's an open house on Sunday, Fred, is that enough time for someone to come to you this week and get everything in order to show up at the open house on Sunday?
Yes. You know, I need 20 minutes with them. I just need to talk to them and I need to hear what their scenario is. And depending what their scenario is, you know, it may be a simple yes or no, or it might be a little more of a deeper dive, depending whether they're self-employed. There's a lot of strategies out there. There's a lot of products. There are 2-year rate locks for new construction. You buy a new construction house today and it's not done for 2 years, we can lock your rate for 2 years at today's rate, believe it or not. There are recast options for people that have a house to sell currently that maybe haven't sold that house yet. They can buy the other house now and then take the funds from the sale and recast the new loan to minimize the payment so they're not stuck. There's interest-only loans. There's all sorts of options. It's almost like when you're going in a store or buying a car, you just have to pick out what you like, what the color is, what the style is, and what makes the most sense for you. And that's something that I'm going to help you figure out. And you need to do it. I mean, Sari and Jen can't waste their time. They don't want to waste their time. You have to speak to someone like myself before you go out there and go into these houses. Because the problem is, once you see that house that you like, if you're not prepared to buy it, you're probably going to be chasing a house around in circles after that. And then it gets really difficult. So you just have to be ready.
And people have been talking about the historic lows on these mortgage rates. Are they still as low as they were? And is there any projection for them to be increased anytime soon?
Rates are low. Money is cheap. And if you listen to the news, rates are supposed to go up. And it's a payment, I tell people it's your rent payment every month. If you're comfortable with paying $3,000, $4,000, $10,000, $6,000, $8,000, whatever that is, right now it's a payment. And if the rates go up 1%, that rent payment or your mortgage, whatever you want to call it, is just going to be more next year. So it's less disposable income. So yes, rates are low. They're historically low. And yes, people are saying they're going to increase, which means your mortgage or your payment will increase.
So you have your paperwork for your mortgage. You show up at one of the houses that Jen and Sari show you and you decide you want the house. So you call your real estate lawyer, Dana, and
Correct.
you do the inspection. So now you hear about houses, right, that have an accepted offer. They're doing the inspection and sometimes that falls through. So how does that work, Dana, in that case? And then when can another buyer maybe make another offer? How long does that process take?
So usually the inspection is done within a couple of days after the accepted offer. Sari and Jen would schedule that inspection. They would refer inspectors unless the purchaser had their own. It's actually pretty rare here in Westchester for people not to go through after an inspection. Houses are well built here. Many have been around for a very long time. So it is rare for that to happen, but it could happen. And if it did happen, the buyer is under no obligation at that point to the seller because they haven't signed a contract, because the inspection's done prior to the contract signing. So then, of course, if they decided not to, then I guess the seller would go to the next buyer. But if there are any type of repairs or anything like that, the agents discuss that with the buyer, they ask the seller, and then those get memorialized in the contract of sale.
Dana, can you give like a really quick synopsis? Because so many people that live in New York aren't from New York, and it's possible that their purchases were escrow states and things like that, where perhaps due diligence is done after because a home is kept. Can you talk about how that's different in New York a little bit?
Sure. New York is a very different state. So I tell a lot of my clients who are moving from other states to pretty much put aside what they've learned in their prior purchases. And as New York is different, it's even different. They're sister states like Connecticut and New Jersey. So there is no ongoing inspection contingency, as I said, in the contract. So that's why it's done first. And the house is being taken in as-is condition unless any repairs are memorialized in the contract. Keep in mind, plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electrical, and appliances all have to be in working order at closing. So when you get to the closing, right before the closing, you do a walkthrough with your agent, and Sari and Jen are experts at this, and they'll take you through the house and make sure everything is in working order and in the same condition it was as contract signing. Certain towns, I work all over Westchester County. Certain towns have different type of, so northern Westchester, a lot of the houses are on septic. So then you would do a separate septic inspection, which is something that, in the city, you're not used to all of these things. So we help and guide you through all of this as well. You would do a separate septic inspection. One other thing we look at sometimes is oil tanks. And we want to make sure that there are no underground oil tanks on the property. So that is something else that, we guide you through and as part of the inspection process prior to contract signing.
And oftentimes, the further north you go, you might be on well water, which isn't municipal
well
water, and that's a whole nother conversation. So we don't have to get into the gritty of that. But the most important thing, and if you're getting all this, is that there's so many details.
Right.
And there's so many things. So part of choosing a real estate agent is getting their cabinet, right? So we come loaded with people that we've vetted through the years of experience, whether it's an inspector, whether it's a septic inspector, whether it's an attorney, a mortgage broker, a flooring person, a contractor, a handyman, whatever the case may be. That being said, obviously the choice is all yours, whether to use them or not, but building up that trust and that camaraderie between your agent avails all of these people to you. And part of Jen and our business, most of all, I would say that, and I'm not saying this to float our boat, but we're exceptionally good at talking to people through towns and finding towns that make sense. And because we're on such a big team, there's not as much of a selfish, you have to buy our town. It just doesn't exist.
Mhm.
If we're listening to somebody's wants and needs and they want international and they want walk to town and they want diversity, but they want, an older style of home and they don't want to be more than 35 minutes for the city, there's no way I'm going to tell you that Chappaqua is going to give that to you. It's just not the case. But we have specialists in a Larchmont, which is exactly what I just described, I think, that would sell that to you. And the point is that I think, and I don't have to know because Jen's here, I just have to have like bullet points of kind of what you're looking for. And with that, then you get the experience that she has in those markets and those conversations about how to win bidding wars, or perhaps this bidding war is not worth going into because in 10 years from now, we can promise you that these prices are so crazy, you might not get it back. So, dealing with pushy salespeople is not what you get with this team. And dealing with attorneys that don't care about the actual person versus getting the transaction off their desk is not what you get on this team. And with Wells Fargo, I speak from such experience. It is beginning to end, the follow through, the follow up, the teams of people that help you get to the finish line they're awesome. I have my mortgage with Wells Fargo. I suggest Wells Fargo often because they just do such a good job. And these are things that we've kind of vetted through because it's an experience, right? This is likely the biggest purchase you're making. At least this part in your year. And if you buy up or buy down, whatever the case may be, and you've worked really hard to get to the position where you want this for yourselves, you want this for your girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, wives, doesn't matter, children. And we're here to kind of help that process in a much less in your face way, if that makes any sense.
I would say that, I know it goes without saying for Sari as well, we have personal relationships with the vast majority of our clients. So, we don't just view it as a transaction, but we know we're going to stay in touch. And we're the first person someone calls when, they need a recommendation for kitchen remodeling, or they're thinking about signing their kid up for soccer and they want to know some of the options for that. And part of the piece, although we are so familiar with everyone and helpful, when it needs to be that we get pushy and aggressive to get you the house of your dreams, we can do that. And part of, why we have the relationship with Fred and Dana is that they're also exceptionally responsive. Dana touched on the fact that a home is not yours until you're in contract. And from that point of accepted offer to contract, it's very competitive and it's still a mad dash. And, with the partners on this call, we've had amazing turnaround times. We've been able to help guide people from accepted offer to contract, sometimes in as fast as 24 hours, if that's what's needed. So, it's just to know that you have a team on your side that really has the expertise to get you a level of success. That's what we try to do for all of our clients, like we would do for our own family.
And 24 hours does sound awfully quick. How long does it typically?
God bless her.
That's
She
not
can do it.
typical.
I've never done it. She gets it done. She's like the fastest in the West.
What's like an average timeline nowadays?
Couple days.
Yes, definitely less than a week.
Yeah.
But in the spring market between March and say July, August, it has to be within a few days. or else the purchaser can easily lose the house.
Just
And
keep in mind, yeah, it's important then to point that out. Like in New York, listing agents, my business is 50-50. We show these listings until you're in contract. We might notate that there's an accepted offer, but what if it falls through, right? So the interest of the seller is to continue to show it as backup. So, we move as quickly as we can. Sometimes weekends get in the way, sometimes holidays get in the way, but we move as quickly as we can to perform. And we do that in order to ensure that house is actually going to you. It's important, to understand that. And I think it's also important as we talk about all this, that Fred kind of picks up on what the appraisal process looks like, because it's a huge piece of this business that a third-party company has a lot of influence kind of over what the values of homes are. And we've had some great successes in them, and we've had some not so great successes in them. And I think it's good to have a bank kind of give you an idea of what that process looks like.
So Jen, sorry, Dana, and I'll touch on the appraisal process in a second, but you guys seeing a lot of cash deals, I'm
Yeah.
assuming?
Or
not
just
as much right now, but definitely throughout this year, there were quite a few.
So in my experience, and as I sit back and I watch all these transactions all over the place, I get it. Like cash is king. A lot of times, that cash offer puts you ahead of the pack. There are ways, there are opportunities, and these are just one of the strategies or products that I mentioned before that I'm going to kind of focus on for a second. It is possible, to close all cash in the right situation, but end up having a mortgage immediately after close. It's kind of like being I like to call it like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Everybody has their reserves, or everybody has their brokerage account, or everybody has their retirement and savings. Not everybody really wants to close all cash, or not everybody's really willing to spend that money to buy a house. But it is possible to get lines of credit, streamlined lines of credit, asset-based lines of credit on such things as securities, for example, which have a very quick process, only take 24 to 48 hours to approve. In reality is you can use that line of credit to close all cash on a deal, which will separate you from the 30 other people that are looking at the house. And the reality is someone like myself can set you up to have a mortgage immediately after that all cash close. So you have the confidence or the security of having a financing in the end. So if you can make yourself appear to be cash, and you can have the security of a mortgage after the fact, and we can talk about this offline one day if you want, strategically, that will put you in front of the other 100 home buyers out there looking at a similar listing, just trying to win that house. So that's just one idea that I had.
There's easier ways to do that, though, if you
Yeah.
go at non-mortgage contingent. So maybe you want to have a discussion of what that is, Fred?
I was just going to
Yes.
say that.
So all cash deals, no mortgage contingencies, appraisal waivers, little things like this in today's market are going to enable you to separate yourself from the masses, put you in front of the groups to win that house, if that's really the house you want, the house of your dreams. And if you are educated and strategic and smart about it, and you talk to someone like myself or the Compass team or Dana, they're going to kind of help you figure this out. It's the norm right now to waive appraisals. It's the norm right now to waive mortgage contingencies a lot of the time. It's the norm right now to just kind of make yourself look better than the rest to win these houses because it's so competitive. And in doing that, it's not necessarily putting yourself in harm's way. It's basically understanding the process and understanding the position that you're putting yourself in and understanding what you're capable of. If you waive a mortgage contingency and you go into this house, wanting to purchase it, the reality is you're telling them that you're going to purchase that house all cash. And reality is, you're going to respect that, scenario with all parties, as a person. And after the fact, after closing all cash, there's nothing that is not allowed for you to put a mortgage in place immediately after the fact to secure financing. That's one of the strategic ways that people go about winning these bids today and, having these cash offers. Not everybody that's paying cash is walking away, 30, 60 days later after closing with no mortgage on the property. A lot of people are putting financing after the fact, after closing in place, because that is their goal and that is the reality up front. They're just strategically making themselves appear better and as like optimal as they possibly could to the seller just to win that deal.
Yes, really cash and going without a mortgage contingency should be really the same for the seller.
But Dana, can you explain non-mortgage contingent and like what the risk is there? I mean, Jen and I can, but you see it and you deal with the after effects of it as much as we do. And I think it's important to understand what that means.
Okay, well, I'll start with what a mortgage contingency is.
Works.
So typically in the contract of sale, there would be a mortgage contingency. It's really the only contingency that there is in the contract. So once the purchaser signs the contract, they give their down payment, seller signs the contract, then it's considered fully executed and it's dated. From that date, a purchaser has 30 days to get their mortgage contingency. It's not a clear to close, it's not closing, it's just that they would get a mortgage commitment from their lender. So the purchaser, and Fred, you can chime in when you need, but a purchaser is going to work with their lender. The lender is going to appraise the house, and the lender is going to do a comprehensive review of the purchaser's financials to determine if they're qualified for the loan. If they are qualified and the house appraises and all of that, and this is not a separate appraisal contingency because most people do not have appraisal contingencies in Westchester. It really is just not done. Then they will, the lender will either give them a denial if they're not qualified, and then the contract would be canceled. This purchaser would get their down payment returned. Also, it's pretty rare for that to happen, but that could happen. Or the they're going to give, the lender will give the purchaser their loan commitment if they think they're qualified. And then once they have their commitment, then the deal becomes non-contingent. So many people in this market have been waiving that contingency so that the deal is not contingent on them getting a mortgage, not contingent on any appraisal or anything like that. It just means that the purchaser has to purchase and has to go forward with the purchase, even if they cannot get a mortgage.
So Dana, the trick to that is, and that's nothing to be scared of, because someone like myself can underwrite a loan up front for somebody buying a house prior to them even having a property, which obviously you guys all know. And I just want to make sure our audience is aware of that. If somebody comes to me today and says, hey, I want to buy a house 3 months from now, next spring, next month, I can collect all your documents right now, and I can have a loan underwritten for you right now with the 123 to be determined address. And I can give you your mortgage commitment letter prior to you even having a house. So reality is, if you go through that process and you let someone like myself underwrite your scenario up front before you even have a house, you should not be worried about having to waive mortgage contingency in this type of market, because you would already understand and know what your purchasing power is. And just having that knowledge, again, will separate you from the rest.
Yes, and many of my clients waive their mortgage contingency. It's quite common here. And they do that because they feel very comfortable because they've talked to their loan officer prior to making that decision.
And we can talk specifically, it doesn't have to be right now, it could be on an individual basis of what happens if you don't waive your mortgage contingency and the third party that the bank uses does not agree with the value that you're paying. Because there's a lot of different scenarios that go into it. And there's a lot of different solutions and ways to work around it that are kind of specific to each deal. But just because, the third party, and it's not a Wells person who, in this example, that does that appraisal, there's rules. There's, church and state, and there's a line and there's a wall and they don't speak to each other. They go in and agree or don't agree or disagree, I should say, with that value. Jen and I as agents and many, many other agents out there will put together packages to kind of to justify prices and all the rest of it. But if they don't agree, there are different ways that we can combat that. And we work sometimes with the seller and sometimes we can't, but ultimately we work up ways to try to get that value where we need it to be. It's also important to understand if you're mortgaging, most people conventionally mortgage 80-20, right? So it's 10% at contract, 80% finance, 10% at close. If you're buying a house for $1 million, let's just say, and the house appraises at $900,000, your difference that you own to make that loan real and whole, I shouldn't say real whole, I should actually go through, is not the $100,000 difference. It's really the percentage that you're mortgaging. So in this case, it would be 80% of that difference. And we can get into, granular of what that looks like, because it's important that when you go into that process, which is why you want to work with experienced agents, mortgage brokers, and attorneys, how that affects your piece. If A happens, what then? And having those type of solutions and conversations and situational kind of conversations is important. So you know what you can do in the future, not what you think you can do. It's important.
Right.
Harry, that's an excellent point that you just brought up. Reality is, in a hot real estate market with an amazing listing, there is the chance that sometimes the house just might not appraise because today's purchase price might be slightly ahead of yesterday's comps.
Yep.
Because the graph is going up.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is there's ways to figure that out. Traditionally, 20% down on a house, 80% financing. There are other products out there that allow for less than 20% down on houses, even on jumbo financing. And there's scenarios out there where I can help you shuffle around the numbers that it might not even affect your out of pocket in reality when the house slightly just doesn't appraise. Because again, today's sales price on that amazing house at the end of the cul-de-sac that everybody's been waiting for is probably going to be slightly higher than yesterday's comp because the market's headed this way. And if it doesn't slightly appraise, that doesn't mean that it's not a good deal or the value's not there. That just means we need to shuffle around numbers in terms of what's most important for you. Because if you put 15% down on a jumbo mortgage without PMI versus 20% down, reality is it might be the same difference to you in the end and you win the house. You just have to understand that and be comfortable with it.
And ultimately, a house is worth what you're willing to pay for it. And it, sometimes, we think, and I hate using cars as examples because I'm not a car salesman. Either is Jen. I can speak to that. I don't even negotiate my own cars. Anyway, but you go in there and you're all jacked up and you're ready to negotiate. You're going to get this thrown in and that thrown in. It's kind of the opposite today in the real estate market. You have like your sticker price, and that's kind of a suggestion, right? This is what we think the value is worth. We want it to come in around here. But if more than one person, quite frankly, if two people agree with that price and they bid it, you have to understand that value just changed.
Oh, right, because unlike cars, it's the only one. So it's not
exactly
like
right.
they're just playing with the inventory.
That's
exactly. And a lot of times we have these bidding war scenarios and clients will say, well, what would you bid? And what we can say is we can give you detailed information on comps and get you close to value. But then the last component is the emotional piece and what you're willing to pay for something. And, some of that you can't always put an exact price on it. And it's worth different amounts to different people.
And then it always comes back to the conversation we start with, what can you afford, right? So it all comes back to having that pre-approval, knowing what you actually have, what you can bring to the table. If it doesn't go over, do you have the cash to make it up? Maybe put more down. I'm giving lots of scenarios, but that's why we start. You meet your agent and then you start with your bank. That's like this, that is like the next step. It is like the same step almost, because if you don't know what you can do, the last thing you want to do is get into a situation where you're over the moon in love with a home and you just can't afford it and you've won it. And then you have to pull out. It's so disappointing. I'm telling you, I see it a lot where people go into something, they win. And then there's this thing called remorse, right? It's buyer's remorse. Did I pay too much? I can't afford it. Those sorts of things. So you can insulate yourself from that emotional disappointment by knowing what you have. It's just prep work, guys. That's all it is.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people, and it's a very good point. The last thing you want to do is end up chasing the house of your dreams. Right. That's tough.
Now, see how we had this great conversation. Look, we have a few minutes left, but it's really great. I love working with all these different experts because you guys are the experts. So it's great to hear you bounce ideas off of each other because there's a lot of people that are thinking these questions and want to hear what you have to say to one another to answer each other's questions. There are a few questions that came in, so I just want to get to just a few before we conclude. But Donna asked about what about FHA loans?
So FHA, Jen and Sari and Dana, you can tell me what you think about that scenario. Me personally, FHA is a good option for you if there is no other option left in terms of financing. There are 3%, 3.5% down is an FHA loan. And that is a popular product for someone that might not have the down payment available to them right now to put more. But the reality is there's 3% down conventional loans also, which are much cheaper. They don't necessarily require mortgage insurance. They have no mortgage insurance options, and they don't charge you an upfront funding fee, kind of like a tax. I like the FHA product in the fact that if you have no other options, maybe there was a bankruptcy or something in the last couple of years and no other financing options are open to you, so be it. Maybe they can make it happen. But if you're just a first-time home buyer going into the market and you have a smaller down payment option, I would explore a 3% down conventional loan first.
We talked a lot about the buyers in the market, but Stelian asked, who are the sellers in this market?
I can hit that one if
Yeah.
you want. They're varied, quite frankly. Because of COVID, it's changed a lot of people's lives, right? So it's changed where you work, how you work, your job. If your business wasn't what it was, or you have a big opportunity, people are relocating like crazy. So the sellers, many sellers that we have, I mean, I can list 5 right now that I have from Westchester that are moving to Austin, Colorado, Florida, San Francisco, and Seattle. That's just, I mean, I have them on the market now.
And that's atypical prior to all of this.
Yeah.
It's
Very
just-
atypical. We
Yeah.
used to just have conversations about people downsizing, their kids left, they're ready to sell. Those are 100% there, but the relocation coming and going has picked up exponentially. We also have quite a few people that are being opportunistic. Maybe they bought a house in, 2007 to 2017, and it's a big house. It's an expensive house, and they just don't think that they can get rid of it. They love it, but maybe it's opportunistic for them to now kind of downsize. Maybe they'll buy something a little bit less and try to offset, these expenditures. We're seeing a lot more people that aren't buying 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in the city. So the budgets out here are up. And if you look at the median sale prices, it's reflecting in what we're talking about. So those $3 million properties, that's 2.5 to 4 million, all of that market that in 2019, maybe there were 7 sales. I'm talking specifically about Chappaqua, there were 7. In 2020, there were 21. And in 2020, there were 21. 2021, we're already pacing over 30. So there's people moving out here that have different money in terms of they would have stayed in the city perhaps a little bit longer, and they're not. So you're seeing sellers put those houses on the market and then go back in and compete in that 1.5 or below market because they're like, we probably should have bought here to begin with. And now we have this big house and we can kind of trade. But you also do see kids that are, adult kids that perhaps maybe moved home with their parents, which many, right? Which stalled that whole sales process, starting to go back. If you look at, I spoke to an agent on a team on Compass in the city yesterday, where he put a rental on for $12,000 and he got 6 bids in under, 6 hours. He said it's going to a bidding war on a rental. That's $12,000 a month. That's a lot of money to
A
spend.
lot of the kids also who were, college students were home. So some families may have had 3 college kids living with them again. Yeah. They ultimately wanted to downsize, but now they're like, oh, we need the space. And now those kids are going back.
And then another thing in a seller is an example of Jen, right? So she was in Larchmont and she moved to, you moved, whatever her reasons were, she had reasons why she wanted to be north, and she created inventory. Thank you. But she did by, making a life change of hers. And that happens. There are people that are moving from Scarsdale and Larchmont that are moving further north, excuse me. So there's a whole big pool of sellers.
There is. I see that too. And I even see people who also took the opportunity, and because the interest rates are so low that they are buying bigger houses. They more expensive houses. They felt like they can get with a good price for their house now and can sell it easily to make that so that way they can sell and buy and feel confident that they were able to sell their house and also buy.
Larchmont was a very interesting example for that because so many of the larger homes that were purchased in the past year were move-up buyers in the community. And, they were oftentimes homes that went to bidding wars, and the bids were from people in Larchmont and people from the city and elsewhere. But ultimately, people who are trading up in the same community know the value of a community. And with the rates being so low, even going up $1 million didn't necessarily impact the bottom line all that much, shockingly.
Yeah.
Wow. So look,
That's a quality problem.
I know. Not my problem.
And I have
but
quite a few like that.
Yeah.
we really learned a lot here together, and I want to thank the panel here, and I want to thank our live audience. And this episode, if you will be posted on YouTube with contact information for the Westchester Living Team, Sari and Jen, who can connect you with Fred and Dana as well, if you want to work with this team here who gets along really well, as we've seen. And they know the neighborhoods really well. So I want to thank you on behalf of Schneps Media and myself, Sky, for being part of this panel and discussion here today. And we'll be doing a lot of interesting topics like this, covering our whole new world. As we're seeing, there's new trends that you haven't seen before. So it's an exciting time, and thank you for leading us as part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning
you.
in. We really appreciate your time.
Everyone.
See you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.